Getting ready for game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final after amazing game 1. We talk all about it on Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before, only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL Game Night your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL. We are available 7 days a week during the regular season and throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs. Whenever you are looking for somebody, a podcast or a YouTube channel to get you updated on what's going on for the night in the NHL. I'm Eddie Garcia, an LA Kings fan on the West Coast. He is Shukri Wrights, a Boston Bruins fan on the East Coast. Together, we're here to discuss all the goal saves, big moments, and stories from the night in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But Shu, we had a day off on Thursday in between games 1 and 2. Still plenty to talk about. But during our last show, when we previewed the finals, I was not that excited about the rematch. You were pumped for it. And I have to admit, game 1 was amazing.
Oh, game 1 was amazing. And listen, sometimes hindsight is 20/20. I am full from overeating. But let me tell you something. What I'm not full from is that epic game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals to start the 2025 Stanley Cup Final. And we got controversy too in that game. Ooh, let's dive right into it. Hopefully it doesn't come with any more pizza because I can't handle it any more of that right now.
All right, well, try and digest your food. We will digest game 1, but I thought it had a little bit of everything, honestly. I mean, it was very entertaining. We had multiple lead changes, the controversy you talked about, which we're going to get into, a major mistake by a player that led to the game-winning goal, and big stars showing up in the big moment as the Oilers get the 4-3 overtime win. And yeah, I guess Florida, there were certainly times they could have played better, and I did think the Oilers were the better team for the most part of game 1, but I thought all in all, just a great opener to the Stanley Cup Final for the NHL. It was a great game. I think it's something that if you're a casual sports fan, you want to check out the final to see what it's all about. That was hopefully a great stage setter for what we're going to see the rest of the series. If you tuned in just to kind of check out, you saw a great game. It was a great night for the NHL, and hopefully we'll see more of this going forward for the rest of the series.
I agree. I mean, this game was the epitome of why the Stanley Cup playoffs is the greatest there is in sports. And the more I think about it, I have had the opportunity to just digest on what we saw in game number 1 on Wednesday night, the more I've come to the conclusion that when we last did our episode together, that not forget about just being right. I knew that this was going to be an incredible Stanley Cup final, but I didn't expect the manner, and as well as the fashion of how the game played out. And that's part of the reason why even 24 hours later, I'm kind of still shaking my head as to we saw something that was completely uncharacteristic. And Eddie, I think you know what I'm talking about. Something that we haven't really ever seen in the last 3 years from a Florida Panther Paul Maurice coach team. A blown lead in the Stanley Cup Finals, especially late in the game. That surprised me.
Yeah, and even though it's the same two teams, we've already seen some pretty big differences from what we saw a year ago.
Yep.
Obviously, the Oilers win game 1. They didn't win the first game of the series last year until game 4. We didn't have any overtime games in the 7-game series last year. We get one game, we got overtime. And Leon Draisaitl had no goals in the finals last year. That's something we're going to touch on a little bit later when we talk more about the Oilers. He gets 2 in game 1, so he's already a factor. So, again, same two teams, a lot of the same two characters or sets of characters on each side, but there's already been some differences. And I did want to ask you, and you can answer the question now, what was your big surprise from game number 1?
That's a great question because I think that there are several really great surprises from game number 1. And I'm going to start with what I teased just a moment ago. How many of you in the United States and Canada and wherever you may listen and watch the pod thought that the Florida Panthers were going to blow a 3-1 lead in game number 1? You just proved my point. It just doesn't happen. It does not happen, and it hasn't happened in the last 3 postseasons combined. It just happened. So when Florida was up 3-1, I'm thinking, holy smokes, we are really about to see Florida do what it has done the previous 2 Cup Finals, but especially in the postseason, and that is slowly wrap its snake body around the jugular of the opponent and just squeeze the life out of it. But what we have seen from Edmonton in this postseason is their ability to never say die. And that actually surprised me because, again, you never see the Florida Panthers blow multi-goal leads late in regulation. You never see the Panthers give opponents the opportunity to come back in games. Listen, this is not to say that Florida played a terrible game 1. That was not the case. This was a terrifically played game on both sides. Let's just call it for what it is. But what surprised me, and this leads me to point directly number 2, man, you got to give credit where credit is due in terms of Stuart Skinner. Because how many times have we seen in this postseason, heck, even last year, but especially in this postseason, where you're thinking, the dam's about to break. But then he settles in. The final, let's say 70 minutes of play, Stuart Skinner looked like the potential, I say this slightly, the potential Conn Smythe winner if the Oilers were to win this series, because he just did not allow the fact that he was a little rattled on early on to get in the way. And then also, the third part that surprised me, lastly, Sam Bennett. How many ways can you score goals, including controversy? He now leads in all of the NHL playoffs with 12 goals this postseason. And the way that he scored, I thought that could have very been a controversial point that we were talking about even 24 hours later. But Sam Bennett, man, I mean, if he wasn't going to get paid before, he's certainly going to get paid this offseason because he's been so dynamite for the Florida Panthers.
Well, I'm along the same lines as you as far as surprised about the comeback, but I'm also surprised how it happened in that
I agree.
Florida only had 8 shots on goal in the third period and overtime. 2 shots on goal in the third period. Credit the Oilers, obviously, for putting the amount of pressure they did on the Florida Panthers to prevent them from getting a lot of zone time, making them defend in their own end. But for the Panthers to be so ineffective in the third period and overtime was pretty surprising to me. You talked about the controversy. I did not agree with Oilers head coach Chris Knobloch challenging for goalie interference. Sam Bennett, he knows how to be that crafty guy around the net. There may be, he knows if he gets a little bump and he can fall into the goalie or bump the goalie, he's going to do it. But at the same time, I thought there was contact on his skate. I thought that's why he fell down in front of the net and maybe made contact with Stuart Skinner. I did not think that was a good opportunity to challenge, especially in that situation. I know if you win, you wipe away the game-tying goal, but if you lose, you're giving them a power play and a chance to score the go-ahead goal, which is what happened. I just think, and I know goalie interference is tricky, I just think you have to be 100% certain that it's goalie interference. You can't think it might be. You can't think it could be. You have to know it is, and maybe they felt that. I don't know. But me watching that, I thought the explanation on the goal counting, I was along the same lines as that. I know there are other people that disagree, but I didn't think that was a great challenge by Chris Knobloch in that situation. Didn't end up hurting him in the end, but it did obviously help the Panthers to get off to that lead.
2 points on that one there. First one, as far as the challenge is concerned, I thought it was a bad challenge, and my reason was because, listen, I just felt as if that the whole goalie interference rule, it's got to be one of the most aggravating rules there is in the NHL. That's number one. Number two, this is going to ruffle feathers, but frankly, I do not care at this point in stage, at this point in the postseason. Congratulations to the NHL. You have now set the standard on what goalie interference is. You cannot, and I'm going to repeat this loud and clear, you cannot go back and forth, waver on this at this point in juncture. That moment pretty much showed the entire hockey world what the standard is So my point now is to the NHL, keep the standard. Don't go back and forth now on what is in game number 1 and what isn't in games number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Be consistent, please. That's what I'm going to ask for moving forward. Maybe I'm asking for too much, but you've now have make the standard very clear in game number 1 based upon the ruling on that call.
Yeah, we'll see. I hope you're right. I hope the standard has been set. I'm not convinced, though, because as you said, goalie interference is a tough call. Yeah. And I've seen that called before. I've seen something similar like that called before as goalie interference. So I don't know. We'll see. The NHL, not too consistent when it comes to that kind of thing. No injuries, thankfully, to report from game 1. Connor Brown did play for the Oilers. We know Zach Hyman's out for the whole series, but no injury updates or no new injuries to talk about going from game 1 to game 2, which is always good. You want the players to be able to play as much as possible. Up next, we're going to focus on how the Edmonton Oilers can make it a 2-0 series lead by winning again on home ice. That's next on Locked On NHL Game Night. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place so you can stop managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, let's get more into the Edmonton Oilers and what they need to do going into game number 2 to have a 2-0 series lead. But we will begin with a man that knows what he's talking about when it comes to the Edmonton Oilers, and that is the wonderful host of Locked On Oilers, our guy, Nick Zararis.
It was the Oilers forecheck. What will it be in game number 2? Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers here ahead of game number 2 of the Stanley Cup Final between my Edmonton Oilers and Armando Velez's Florida Panthers. In game 1, the Oilers forecheck was a resounding difference, and most importantly and most notably different from last year's Stanley Cup Final. The Oilers defense did a tremendous job of moving the puck. And my big 2 keys for this game, not going to surprise you if you're familiar with Locked On Oilers, transition hockey. Can the Oilers quickly go from defense to offense against that stifling Florida forecheck? Look for the Oilers to utilize the long flip out of the defensive zone to buy themselves room, to allow players like Kasperi Kapanen and, yes, Connor McDavid to build up speed and catch up to loose pucks. And then, on the other end, look for Oilers forecheckers like Kasperi Kapanen, Vasily Podkolzin, and Evander Kane to just make sure they're hitting whoever on the Florida Panthers happens to have the puck. Don't think it's a coincidence Thomas Nosek took a delay of game penalty in overtime there with Vasily Podkolzin bearing down on him with the game Podkolzin was having. For everything you need to know about the Oilers heading into game number 2 of the Stanley Cup Final, be sure to check out Friday's edition of Locked On Oilers, wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube.
And thanks to Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers, done a tremendous job all year. We appreciate him chiming in on what he expects for game number 2. And I don't know about you, Shu, but watching that game for Edmonton, I thought they were pretty clearly the better team for most of the game. But I also thought when it's in overtime, man, they better win this game. I'm not saying if they lost game 1, they can't win the series. But when you've got home ice for game 1, when you are coming off losing a game 7 to the same team a year ago, when you've played better than that other team for most of the game, and you get a power play chance in overtime, you've got to finish that off. You have to take advantage of that opportunity. And in overtime, a puck goes off a skate. Next thing you know, it's over and you're losing. And we've seen that a lot in these playoffs, some fluky goals. So I thought it was a very important thing for the Oilers to close that game out because of how they played, because of the way that building was going. All that enthusiasm, all that excitement, you're telling yourself and your fans, this year's going to be different. And if they would have had a bad bounce in overtime and lost that one, that would have been hard to come back, I think, and recover from, even though it's game 1. But that didn't happen. They closed it out. The big stars came through, and they get the huge game 1 win. Now they've got that momentum going into game number 2.
let me remind everybody, for those who need reminding, that game one win for the Edmonton Oilers was massive. And here's why. Historically, the team that wins game ones in the Stanley Cup Finals, they about 65%, if not more higher, they go on to win the Stanley Cup Finals. But throw that out for just a moment. In terms of sequel round number 2 between Florida and Edmonton, this was even more important. Even leading into game number 1, the sentiment that I had deep down inside was, if Edmonton is going to win the Stanley Cup, they're going to have to win game number 1. They have to send a message to the Florida Panthers, because here's the reality. Last year, I thought the Edmonton Oilers in game 1 last year, they actually played well, but they had absolutely nothing to show for it. And then in game 1 in this year's Cup Final, the way that they were able to get the scoring started 66 seconds in by some guy named Leon Draisaitl, I thought that was so huge. Why? Because if you were a critic of last year's Edmonton Oilers Cup Final loss where they fell short in game 7, it was the fact that Leon Draisaitl did not score a single goal in that 7-game series. Yet, in game number 1, he scores the first goal of the Cup Final, 66 seconds in. And then go back and watch that overtime winning goal by Leon Draisaitl on that beautiful feed by Connor McDavid, more on him in just a second. That told me so much about the headspace, the mental fortitude of the team. Yeah, they were down 3-1, the Oilers were, but they never seemed to be in a state of panic. They stayed true to their game. They stayed true in terms of bringing the transitional game. The transitional game came into play in the later stage of the second and as well as the third period. And you saw, as well as you talk about the speed in terms of Kapanen and as well as McDavid. McDavid, I think, has been the biggest story in these playoffs because of the fact that it's not about the scoring of the goals. It's the assists. And game 1 proved exactly just that. And then the other difference in terms of the Oilers from last year to this year, defensively, my gosh. And then you have a healthy Mattias Ekholm. And Eddie, as you know, I talked about it in the last series when he came back in game 5 against Dallas. This was so important, having Mattias Ekholm and Bouchard on that blue line definitely turned out to be a huge difference in game number 1, and as well as just seeing how well Darnell Nurse was able to make himself a big factor in this game.
Yeah, no, the defense has been really good. I think certainly John Klingberg stepping up and coming into the lineup has certainly helped as well in their depth. And I didn't think Jake Wallman was much of a pickup at the deadline for them. He's been better than I thought he would be. But you mentioned Leon Draisaitl. I think that's something I didn't take into more consideration going into this final. The fact that he was not healthy in last year's playoffs and clearly was not a factor in the finals last year. His health this time around clearly is different from last year, and that's going to be a big factor for the Oilers going forward with his 2 goals in the game winner in overtime. He's healthy, and when he's healthy, he can be a handful to take on. As for Connor McDavid, 2 primary assists, including the overtime game winner. He's amazing. Although I will say one thing, everyone was wowing about his assist to Mattias Ekholm. I don't think he was passing it to Ekholm. I think he was just throwing it in front of Evander Kane. Evander Kane was crashing the net, and he was taking 2 Panthers with him, and McDavid's like, I'll just flip it to him. Maybe it goes off him. Maybe it goes off one of the Panthers and goes on net. And it somehow went through all of them, and Ekholm happened to be there. So, look, Connor McDavid is capable of making amazing things happen. I don't know about that one. I think that was just a little bit of luck on his side. But not luck for the Oilers in getting 46 shots on goal in this game 1.
Yeah.
I know there was an overtime period, obviously, and they won it in the final minutes of overtime, so it was like 4 full periods, but still, that's a lot of shots on goal for the Oilers. Special teams, they get the power play goal to win it, so that was obviously a key as well. And we talk about their depth. Victor Arvidsson gets a big goal. Mattias Ekholm ties it. Guys like Evander Kane throwing the body around. And you mentioned Stuart Skinner. I mean, he was not the busier of the 2 goalies, and we'll talk about Sergei Bobrovsky in Florida in a minute. But he continues to do enough to get the job done, and that's all that matters. 3 goals allowed on 32 shots. I didn't think any of the goals he allowed were soft goals. So just do what you can do. Stop the shots you're supposed to stop, and give your team a chance to win. And that's what Stuart Skinner's doing.
I mean, Stuart Skinner was not bad in this game at all, which is why, like, I honestly thought that, I mean, this not being a hot take centrist person at all, neither team played a bad game. Florida played to their strengths like early on, even after they fell behind 1-0 after the Draisaitl goal. But the truth was with Stuart Skinner, we've seen this time and time again. He'll have bad games and he'll bounce right back up. And then he'll have bad starts, he'll bounce right back. And that's been the nature of Stuart Skinner. And lastly, I'll even conclude by saying that what you've seen from Jake Wallman cannot be overstated in terms of his impact in this lineup, and as well as, you know, like Victor Arvidsson, who I thought like was a key addition to this Edmonton team, and he has been absolutely money, especially in game number one. Just watching him play and how he was able to help create like time and space in terms of scoring opportunities, and it's going to be fascinating to see how Florida counter reacts in game number two, which we're about to get into in just a moment.
The Oilers are now 7-1 at home this postseason, and of course they have home ice advantage as well. All right, up next, we'll talk about the defending champs. How do they even this thing up heading home? That's next on Locked On NHL Game Night. All right, let's talk about the Florida Panthers. I don't think there's 1 ounce of panic in them at all after losing that game one. Now, were they the better team? No. Did they have a chance to win despite not playing one of their best games? Yes. So I think their takeaway from this to me is we didn't play our game and we still could have won that game. So I don't think and they've got the experience. Like I said, I don't think there's any panic whatsoever coming from the defending champs, at least after one game. Let's find out what our host of Locked On Florida Panthers thinks as we check in with Armando Velez.
The Oilers were able to prevail in game one, and the Panthers are looking to tie the series before it shifts to sunrise. What is up, guys? Armando Velez here from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, here to quickly preview game two of the Stanley Cup Final between the Panthers and the Oilers. And the Oilers were able to match the physicality of the Panthers as both teams got 51 hits in game one, and the Panthers need to be able to rattle the Oilers. Evander Kane was the one leading the way with the hits in game one. The Panthers need to be able to get under his skin. And the Cats were able to get a good amount of high-quality scoring chances against the second and third pair defense of the Oilers. They need to find the way to do that against the Bouchards and the Ekholms of the world. Giving up 2 points each to Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl only smells trouble for the Panthers, and it's going to hurt their chances of getting back in this series. We'll break all this down and more on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
And as always, thanks to Armando Velez, another host who's done a great job all season long and all playoffs long, giving us information on their team. If you're a Panthers fan, you definitely need to be checking out Locked On Florida Panthers. Don't just put Panthers. You might get an NFL team from North Carolina. But yeah, we talked about it a little bit. What was surprising, and that's obviously Florida giving up the lead, 31-0 when having the lead going into the third period in playoff games under Paul Maurice. You can now throw that out the window. But again, I don't see them as being overly concerned. Are they upset they didn't win game one? Yes. Are they upset they didn't play probably their A game? Yes. But I would not be surprised at all to see them bounce back with a strong game two. And if they can go back home with a split, they'll be more than happy with that.
Here's the thing. If you're the Florida Panthers, I think that you're going to have to spend a significant amount of time reminding Tomas Nosek just how important he is, because it was his penalty that ultimately put the Edmonton Oilers on the power play, which led to the Connor McDavid to Leon Draisaitl OT winning goal to give the Oilers a 1-0 series lead. And with that being said, I will start off by saying that let's not forget how important Tomas Nosek has been for the Panthers. Here's the truth. Nosek has been so huge for the Panthers that if it's not for his terrific play at even strength on the fourth line in the second round against the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Florida Panthers are not here in the Stanley Cup Finals. Mark my words. That's how critical he's actually been for the Florida Panthers. And to take it even a step further, this is part of the reason why I said that one of the things that really surprised me was the fact that the Florida Panthers did not close game one out. Here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. Since Paul Maurice took over prior to the start of 2022-2023, the Florida Panthers have been 31-0 in the playoffs when they led after either the first or the second period, and 29-0 when they led after two. Both of those records went up in smoke in game number one. And that is what amazes me, is that sometimes when you think you've got a team figured out, like the Florida Panthers, like, they're leading by multiple goals, they're not letting that up. And you think that, no chance for the Oilers. Meanwhile, we've seen this time and again with the Edmonton Oilers. But as far as the Florida Panthers are concerned, the thing that I look at is that the Panthers, there are moments and times where I felt like they were too conservative with the puck. Like they were too, like they were not willing to take risk. And I think against a team like the Edmonton Oilers, you have to be willing to take the risk. Yes, they are a tight, well-rounded defensive team, but when you are too conservative with the puck and you're not forcing the issue the way that the Panthers typically have during these playoffs, it comes back to burn you. And that's exactly what the Oilers did on Wednesday night. They took advantage of the fact that Florida said, we're going to be conservative with the puck, and we're just going to turn those into opportunities. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So in conclusion, I think if you're the Florida Panthers, what's got to change for game number two is that they cannot take the foot off the gas, and that Thomas Nosek cannot allow his confidence to go down the drain. I think it's going to be important for him to certainly have a really big bounce back game, but I'm talking about Nosek in particular because that fourth line for the Panthers has been certainly one of the absolute best in the NHL, and he's a big part of the reason why that certainly had been the case.
And I thought the Oilers did a good job on the Florida defense that has been so good this postseason. You didn't see a lot of guys like Nate Schmidt and Nico Mikkola and guys like that jumping up in the play like we've seen at other times. Although they did get Sam Bennett 2 goals, as you mentioned. He now has 12 this postseason, leading all players in postseason goals. And yeah, you're right. He's going to make a lot of money in the offseason. Brad Marchand, who they got at the deadline, came up with a big goal in game one. Where's Matthew Tkachuk? I mean, clearly he's not healthy because he's not a factor in these games at all. Like we've seen him be a factor. It's kind of like Austin Matthews. You appreciate that they're playing hurt, but while you're out there, you're still responsible for your play. You're still responsible for being critiqued for how you play. And he just hasn't shown up in a lot of these postseason games. The Panthers, to their credit, have been able to get by without him. But Matthew Tkachuk, not a factor in game one at all. Did want to mention Sergei Bobrovsky, 4 goals allowed on 46 shots. We mentioned the number of shots. I thought he was the better of the 2 goalies, but he had to be because he was seeing a lot more shots. He had some big saves. Had that save on Trent Frederick. Bouchard had a break in overtime. The one goal he let in, Victor Arvidsson, I thought that was a bit soft. I know they said he was screened on that one with someone kind of skating in front of him as he was seeing that shot. Maybe he didn't pick it up right away. That one, though, I thought was a little bit leaky, but overall, Bobrovsky, I thought he was good, but again, for the Florida Panthers, if Stuart Skinner is the weak link for Edmonton, which we think it is, and I'm not trying to knock the guy, but I think that's even Oilers fans were talking this season about we got to get a better goalie. We're at the deadline. We need to pick somebody else up. This guy's not good enough. He's been good enough so far, but if he's the weak link, you've got to make him work. I mean, if he's only going to see 2 shots in the third period, 8 shots total in the third and overtime, that's just not enough. So the Panthers obviously have to make Stuart Skinner work more going forward in game number 2.
I couldn't agree more, because if you go back to the Eastern Conference Finals and you remember that Freddie Anderson was made to work, and it worked to perfection for the Florida Panthers. When the Florida Panthers are making the opposing team goaltender work, like getting shots on net, they usually, not all obviously, but they usually tend to find its way through and squeak and find a little hole to get through the back of the net. In this case, I was more surprised that Florida was not able to generate the typical volume of shots that they normally would have. And I think that's definitely a major reason why things fell apart for them in the third period and as well as in overtime, was because, again, give credit where it's due. Edmonton defensively really took away those shooting lanes and the opportunities for Florida. But Florida, when they're going at their absolute best, is when they're getting pucks deep. And I'm not saying that to say that they were casual in their game or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. Because like I said before, both teams played a really solid game in terms of their game plan. But the problem was that because when the game is that tight, you have absolutely zero margin for error. So if you're Florida, going into game 2, get shots on net every which way you possibly can. Because if you have another repeat of what happened in game number 1, like, you're going to lose. It's just that simple. You are going to lose. So I think that's got to be the number one message for Florida going into game number 2. Get shots on Stuart Skinner and make him work.
They did it in the second period with 17 shots, but like I said, only 2 shots in the third, only 6 in overtime in that game 1 defeat. Looking forward to seeing what happens in game 2. Who's going to be the hero? Who's going to be the GOAT? I'm not talking greatest of all time, by the way. I'm talking about the guy who screws up. Looking forward to talking about game number 2. All right, before we sign off, we are not supposed to talk about NHL news, Shu. However, your Boston Bruins have hired a new head coach, Marco Sturm. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down on Marco Sturm as a Bruins fan. He's thumbs up for you listening to the podcast. Shu says
like thumbs up. That thumbs up,
Sturm.
definitely. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Shukri Wrights. Thank you for listening and watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.